Good afternoon and welcome to Matters Financial and Geopolitical from a Frontier, and thank you for stopping by. Let me start with some macro thoughts and thoughts from Charles Mackay. Men, it has been well said, think in herds. It will be seen that they go mad in herds, while they only recover their senses slowly and one by one. And to that point, the Bond freak tweeted, "Extraordinary popular delusions and the madness of crowds beyond meat." Every age has its peculiar folly, some scheme, project or fantasy into which it plunges, spurred on by the love of gain, the necessity of excitement, or the force of imitation. Nations, like individuals, cannot become desperate gamblers with impunity. Punishment is sure to overtake them sooner or later. Charles Mackay again. Raoul tweeted on the 28th of October, but we've remained at the same level. We are either seeing a change of trend or it's two standard deviations from trend and will roll over again soon. And this is the yield on the US 10-year bond. And essentially, I think the point I would take away from his chart is that we have crossed the peak Wizard of Oz moment, in my opinion. Home thoughts. I wish to wish my wife, Michette, a happy birthday. We met 25 years ago tomorrow, and I thank God for my wife and for my children, and she is my everything. The song that comes to mind is one by Santana called "Stay Beside Me." And there was a time when we went to Finch Hattons in the Savo and it was dusk, and I was driving too fast as I was trying to keep up with the car ahead on a murram track, and the car rolled and everything went into slow motion. And to be frank, it was as if I was outside looking in, and then I remember Nisha putting out her hand and literally dragging me back to life. And that's my Nisha. She literally gave me my life. Dreamy, this is from Just Travel, and it is indeed dreamy. I went back to Rumi, you were born with wings, why prefer to crawl through life? Don DeLillo, it is so much simpler to bury reality than it is to dispose of dreams. There are dead stars that still shine because their light is trapped in time. Where do I stand in this light which does not strictly exist? And then finally, take someone who doesn't keep score, who's not looking to be richer or afraid of losing, who has not the slightest interest even in his own personality. He's free. Political reflections. The rash of protests around the globe have one thing in common. This is from Bloomberg. Hong Kong martial arts guru Bruce Lee urged followers to empty your mind, be formless, shapeless like water. From Iraq to Chile, it feels like protests are everywhere right now. Huge street rallies, violent clashes with police, tires and buildings burning, shops smashed, songs, chants, dances and flash mobs, crowds that gather and vanish in unexpected places, organized via encrypted messaging apps where people use pseudonyms. But not all movements have the same spark, even if their form is similar. Leaderless protests can be hard for governments to deal with because they can't work out who to deal with. Such activity may start from a single issue, then morph into a many-headed hydra. History tells us that keeping leaderless movements going at a high level for a long period is hard, that perhaps even more so as countries fret less about the risk of international blowback, including sanctions. We perceive a more competitive geopolitical environment in which traditional values-based foreign policy objectives have fallen by the wayside, says Jonathan Wood, Director of Global Risk Analysis at Control Risks in Washington, and that's important and really speaks to the point of a lack of leadership from Donald Trump. The default response of many governments is likely to be try and ride at these out as much as possible and hope they begin to dissipate before the economic costs get too high. Protesters in Lebanon achieved at least one of their aims as Prime Minister Saad Hariri announced his resignation on Tuesday following nearly 2 weeks of anti-government unrest. Protesters say they have no confidence that warlords who emerged to lead Lebanon at the end of the 1975 to 1990 civil war can change. I won't hide that I reached a roadblock, Hariri said. Biggest anti-Kremlin protests for 7 years erupted in Moscow this summer. Algerians have been taking to the streets since February, initially to protest the re-election bid of Abdelaziz Bouteflika, the wheelchair-bound, one of North Africa's longest-serving leaders who eventually resigned in April and is not contesting the December election. Chile's social unrest has followed a similar pattern to Brazil in 2013. Both were triggered by a seemingly banal reason, a small hike in public transport fares, and turned into massive protests against an ever-growing list of grievances. Soaring living costs, inequality, deteriorating health and education systems, and particularly in Brazil's case, corruption. In Santiago, 1 million people, more than 15% of the city's population, took to the streets on Friday, and Ecuador's another example. And I wrote about this on the 21st of October in an article I called The New Economy of Anger. In that I said the revolutionary contingent attains its ideal form not in the place of production but in the street, where for a moment it stops being a cog in the technical machine and itself becomes a motor, a machine of attack, in other words, a producer of speed, Paul Virilio. I said Iraq is on a knife edge. Millions of Algerians sent the wheelchair-bound Bouteflika home not too long ago. Hong Kong remains in open rebellion and trying to shake off the crusher of bones, Xi Jinping, and his algorithmic control. The phenomenon is spreading like wildfire, in large part because of the tinder-dry conditions underfoot. Prolonged standoffs eviscerate economies, reducing opportunities, and accelerate the negative feedback loop. I quoted Kapuscinski, revolution must be distinguished from revolt, coup d'etat, palace takeover. A coup or a palace takeover may be planned, but a revolution never. Its outbreak, the hour of that outbreak, takes everyone, even those who've been striving for it, unawares. They stand amazed at the spontaneity that appears suddenly and destroys everything in its path. It demolishes so ruthlessly that in the end it may annihilate the ideals that called it into being. I said this is a revolution and it is a global phenomenon. Again, quoting Kapuscinski, if the crowd disperses, goes home, does not reassemble, we say the revolution is over. And I concluded by saying it is not over. More and more people are gathering in the streets. And unless we're going to Xinjiang the whole world, the current modus operandi is running on empty. Populist cleric Moqtada Sadr joins Iraq protests as political crisis deepens, and this is now in the Shia heartland. Thousands of demonstrators in the holy city of Najaf on Tuesday. At least 240 people have died. He was seen in a white car in the city just after airport sources told AFP he had landed from neighboring Iran. And if the goal of elections is to change the government, then there is a shorter way for you to agree with Mr. Ameri to form a new government. He's always been a radical, and let's see how he plays it from here. I said on the 21st of October, Iraq is on a knife edge. Indeed it is. Moving on, this is Jimmy Kimmel. We mashed up Obama's Bin Laden speech with Trump's al-Baghdadi speech, and the results are amazing. Have a listen, it's a short video. USS used Baghdadi's blood DNA-stained underwear to ID exploded ISIS leader, that's Zero Hedge. The White House confirmed, saying that a combination of DNA analysis and facial recognition technology was used. Baghdadi's head reportedly remained intact following the blast. That and what was left of him were reportedly buried at sea according to Islamic custom, according to Reuters. I don't know what Islamic custom that's according to, but apparently it seems to be the received wisdom. Zero Hedge says in closing it was a combination of cutting-edge forensic technology, including facial recognition and months-old DNA samples, which allowed the US military to quickly ID Baghdadi and then quickly chuck his remains into the ocean. Jared Kushner, who's in Saudi Arabia, according to Amina Bakr, the future of the Middle East starts with investment. Previously, I've treated Kushner as the broker of our times, the Adnan Khashoggi at the court of King Donald, the Trumpster. John Authers, I think Jess Phillips identified the key risk about the UK election. It's inconclusive and becomes a Rorschach test in which everyone perceives a mandate for what they want. Still a lot of nervousness among Tory MPs about the impending election. It's like a can of paint. Once it's open, it's going to splatter everywhere. No one really knows how it's going to turn out, said one. This is according to Sebastian E. Payne. Another, it all feels very hubristic, very Theresa May circa 2017. There's been an epic implosion in sterling volatility. 10 sessions ago, people bought sterling volatility at 14%. Yesterday, they were selling it at 7.8%. At 14, markets price daily moves of 0.875%. Today's market prices 0.48% daily moves, according to the market ear. Unless something strange happens in the Lords today, we're set to know who our next Prime Minister is on Friday, 13th of December. And I take you back to something I wrote, What's Your Road, Man? Holy Boy Road, Madman Road, Rainbow Road, Guppy Road, any road. It's an anywhere road for anybody, anyhow, where body, how. Sterling, and I must commend FX Pip Titan, whose charts I'm coming to rely on increasingly. He says the 1 hour trend is trying to reverse from down to up, but has given no confirmation. So for now, the 1 hour downtrend is holding. We're currently at 128.80, I think it's being sucked up with, so people anticipate a rate cut in the US, but essentially it's very difficult for it to get above 129.50 or 130. My article over the weekend was about the Russia-Africa summit, From Russia with Love, late to the party, Russia's return to Africa, tweeted P. Stronsky. And then I was saying, where Z is fed up and speaks about the end of vanity because the ROI outside commodities and telecoms for China in Africa is negative, Putin has created a hybrid model with an exponential ROI. And that I also concluded by saying, I imagine he is on speed dial. Currency markets, let's turn to that. The euro is at 111.17. Dollar index 97.665, Japanese yen 108.82, Swiss franc 0.9929, the pound 128.82, Australian dollar 0.6873, India rupee 71 the figure, South Korean won 1167.34, the Rial 399.81, Egyptian pound 16.1497, and the Rand 14.6436. It tried to press through that key level of 1450, it didn't, and it's backed up now and remains in that range, 1450 to 1550. Dollar index chart, here we go, 97.663. A lot will hinge and pivot on what the chairman says after the rate cut, whether he's now fully paused or not. Euro dollar, this is again FX pip tighten. The 1 hour trend is trying to reverse from down to up, but has given no confirmations. So for now, the 1 hour downtrend is holding, he says, but we're seeing it edge higher. The most important currency to watch is the renminbi, as I wrote in August, and the renminbi is currently at just below 706, so it's been pretty strong, rebounding strongly. China wants the Communist Party members to pledge loyalty on blockchain. I thought this was interesting. Following Xi Jinping's bombshell speech last week urging his countrymen to seize the opportunity created by technology, the CPC released a decentralized app, a dapp, for members to attest their loyalty on a blockchain. Ofcoin's price jumped by as much as 90% on Saturday, just hours after the CPC released the dapp and said that Lingzhu technology is behind it. As of writing, the coin has fallen by 35% from that peak, but nevertheless, the important takeaway was best described by Nick Carter. It took China about 3 days of being officially interested in blockchain to make their intentions clear, transparent, panopticon, immutable social credit dystopia. I've touched on this in my article, China Turned 70. I said Xi's model is one of technocratic authoritarianism. A recent addition to his bookshelf is The Master Algorithm by Pedro Domingos. All you people that are ready to forsake all of your values for the sake of riding some authoritarian-driven pump, I want nothing to do with you. Nick Carter again. 5th of March 2018, I was talking about how China has unveiled a digital panopticon in Xinjiang. And I said, Xinjiang is surely a precursor for how the CCP will manage dissent. If you're cheerleading this or stressing the nuance behind the statements of dictators and how this is actually good for Bitcoin, you can F off. We have nothing in common. I don't believe in the goddamn underlying technology. I believe in the freedom that the technology gives us from autocrats and dictators. Nick Carter. It matters because people are interpreting it as validation of permissionless blockchains when it represents a perversion and corruption of those ideals. Nick again, not to mention the ability to shut off access to anyone on the system with a flip of a switch, a 21st century authoritative government's dream. That's Rhythm Trader. Bill Ackman, I think WeWork has a pretty high probability of being a zero for the equity as well as for the debt. I couldn't agree with him more. As someone who has put good money after bad, I think this looks like putting good money after bad, and SoftBank should have walked away. Indeed, he should have done, and I can't believe he didn't. Commodity markets, gold, well, we popped above 1500, but we're back below 1490. We're at 1489.25. Crude oil, last trading $55.42. China's room to ease monetary policy is being increasingly limited by price rises on the back of the swine fever outbreak. Surging pork prices, continued spillover effects to other food prices, and the risk of a wage spiral. We believe the PBOC may become more reluctant to deliver any high-profile monetary easing in the coming quarters. That's Nomura. I spoke about the pork apocalypse, and I said it speaks to a very fragile food situation. China pork prices are up 1,000% in 3 months, according to the market ear. Coffee needs a mechanism to stabilize prices. This is Olam in the Financial Times. Feast to famine price swings condemn smallholder farmers who make up the bulk of the world's millions of growers to misery, abandonment of farms, and potentially to illegal immigration. Damaging price extremes are driven by 3 principal factors. Firstly, increasing speculation in commodity markets, especially by quantitative funds that can amplify and extend the period spent at extremes. Secondly, increasingly duopolistic market, with Brazil and Vietnam gaining share at the expense of Latin American and African producers. Finally, the impact of climate change is already being felt in coffee-growing regions. For example, over half of Central America's coffee land is estimated to become unsuitable for growing by 2050. Coffee prices are at 15-year lows. Brazilian stocks have outperformed every G20 equity market in the last 30 years in dollar terms. This is again the market here. Tremendous resource, and I commend them. Capital controls seen on the cards for Lebanon as crisis deepens. Calls are mounting for Lebanon to impose formal restrictions on the movement of money to defend the country's dollar peg and prevent a run on the banks when they open their doors. After nationwide protests, banks have been closed since the start of the uprising 2 weeks ago. In a sign of crumbling confidence, banks have been getting calls from clients asking to move their money abroad, while others are working at a frantic pace to transfer funds to Swiss accounts as soon as lenders resume operations. Capital controls are again becoming the weapon of choice for embattled governments in need of some breathing room, with Argentina tightening its restrictions late Sunday after a left-leaning populist won the presidential elections. Lebanon's central bank governor Riyad Salameh told Reuters on Monday there would be no capital controls. Worsening sentiment is playing out in the market. The yield on Lebanon's dollar bond due in 2021 is now at 33.64%, and essentially that's a defaulted number. We've again referring to the new economy of anger. I spoke about the WhatsApp revolution in Lebanon, and I said prolonged standoffs eviscerate economies, reducing opportunities and accelerate the negative feedback loop. I also quoted Antonio Gramsci. The crisis consists precisely in the fact that the old is dying and the new cannot be born. In this interregnum, a great variety of morbid symptoms appear. Now is the time of monsters. Let's move on to Africa. Afreximbank pulled its IPO as London listings sink. Despite significant interest in the bank from investors in light of unfavorable market conditions, it has decided to postpone the proposed initial public offering at this time. basically the IPO market across Europe is no better. Ferretti, Spa, the Italian super yacht maker, partially owned by the Ferrari family, German computer hardware firm Congatec have suspended their listings. Afreximbank plan to use the funds to help finance rapidly increasing trade flows on the continent, operates in 51 of Africa's 55 countries, has provided about $69 billion of trade financing support. Didn't indicate a post-IPO valuation. Bank reported total equity of $2.7 billion in an investor update last month. Listed on the stock exchange of Mauritius in 2017 via private placement of depository receipts, giving it a market value now of $2.1 billion. The problem with Afreximbank, it's limit long Zimbabwe, and I think that's what probably put investors off at this point in time. Outstanding article in the FT, Robert Friedland, China and the rush for copper in the DRC. When the new president of the DR Congo visited Washington in April, the mining billionaire Robert Friedland was waiting in a room at the Willard Intercontinental to greet him. Also there were the US ambassador to the DRC and Sun Yufeng, the head of China's state-owned CITIC Metals, the largest investor in Mr. Friedland's company Ivanhoe Mines. Sun told Felix Tshisekedi about CITIC's ability to build large infrastructure projects including roads, railways, ports, bridges in the country, something few Western mining companies could match. Since then, CITIC has agreed to invest an additional Canadian $612 million in the Toronto-based Ivanhoe. Mr. Friedland believes he may have found a huge copper mine, Kamoa-Kakula, copper deposit worth at least $10 billion. Every time I go and see him, I first zip my pockets, says Pierre Lassonde, a Canadian mining veteran, of Mr. Friedland's ability to persuade investors to part with their cash. He has that magnetic effect on people. State Department's Energy Resource Governance Initiative says it wants to encourage a level playing field surrounding the critical minerals that underpin clean energy technology and includes DRC as a participant, saying Western investors are very queasy, capital markets are closed for mining investment in the West. In effect, we've decided that we are conceding control of industrial production to China. Then describing how Friedland found this particular resource. The financial crisis melted everything else down. We were the only company that stayed in the DRC. We were living in tents and mud. And when you make a discovery like that, you're in the clouds for 2 years. Friedland claims the Kamoa-Kakula mine has the potential to produce up to 700,000 tons of copper a year at its peak if fully developed. That is almost 6% of China's annual consumption of the metal and would make it the second largest copper mine in the world. No one is skeptical about the resource, but it's not clear what the actual economics of getting it out of the ground will be. He's a very interesting fellow, emigrated from Germany, achieved a certain early notoriety after he was arrested in 1970 on charges of selling LSD, spending more than 6 months in jail, a conviction that was later expunged from his record. He was a friend of Steve Jobs. The two worked together on a farm owned by Mr. Friedland's uncle. It was the apple orchard that inspired the name of the computer company Jobs' biographer later claimed. Chinese are more than willing to be strategic buyers of these assets. The copper market is on sale and they consume half of it. If you're going to Selfridges and it's 50% off, because investors are avoiding the DRC, you're going to buy it. So very interesting. Here's a photograph of him speaking in Santiago while Chinese Premier Xi Jinping is shown on a TV screen. Zambia faces an electricity crisis from global warming. Lungu mentioned climate change 44 times when he addressed the annual opening of Parliament. Worst drought in 4 decades in the southwest of the country has caused crop failures, drastically curbed output. Energy Minister Matthew Kua floated the idea of digging canals that could bring water from the Congo River more than 100 kilometers away. to top up levels at the Kariba Dam on the Zambezi. Experts are skeptical, saying elementary physics makes the idea a non-starter. The Zambezi is more elevated than the Congo, so there are no places in which one could get the Congo River to flow downhill. Canals are absolutely not feasible. This is a photograph of the Kariba hydroelectric dam on the Zambezi River. Mobile money is not helping Zimbabwe's hyperinflation. An IMF mission to the country in August put the rate at close to 300% annually. More recent market estimates based on local currency depreciation imply rates as high as 400%. This time hyperinflation is hitting an almost fully digitized monetary economy due to the proliferation of mobile payments in the country, referencing EcoCash. It's grown in popularity, serving the unbanked. EcoCash's nationwide network of agents suck dollars out of the hands of the population, turning them into digital balances. This amounted to a transfer of foreign cash stock from citizens to the banking system, with the money ending up in the control of the central bank. Not a good idea. Exchange rate at that point was set at 8-1, but demand for paper US dollars never went away, encouraging a free market exchange rate that has since reached as much as 21-1. EcoCash's social media accounts have been inundated with reports of failed transactions and delays. This implies something critical. As I wrote before, quoting Yuan, money is the most universal and most efficient system of mutual trust ever devised. There is no mutual trust in money in Zimbabwe, and that's the mind game that ZANU-PF played on its citizens has evaporated in a puff of smoke. And I've made the point that there is a correlation between high inflation and revolutionary conditions. Zimbabwe is a classic example. The number of unemployed people in South Africa increased from 4.5 million in Q3 2009 to 6.7 million in Q3 2019. Stats SA. South African all share up 5.65% year to date. Dollar versus rand 14.64, so still in that range I've described. Egyptian pound 16.1646. EGX 30 up 10.97% year to date. Nigeria all share down 16.5% year to date. Ghana Stock Exchange down 14% year to date. Tante Kata Angelique Dakar circa 1961, a fantastic newly discovered photograph. The central bank governor here in Kenya said it is true you have GDP numbers, but you can't eat GDP. Ahmed Nasir says, I don't think the statement by Njoroge was correctly digested by Kenyans. He disowned the economic policy of His Excellency Uhuru. He dismissed the GDP growth as fake. He states for the record that Jubilee has let down Kenyans and has set up his alibi for the coming crash. Assuming Safaricom earnings were evenly distributed in the year ended March 2019, their half-year revenue would be $1.21 billion. That is 73% of Airtel Africa's $1.64 billion. And that's why it trades on a premium and closed on yesterday at $28.90. The Nairobi All Shares up 8% year to date. The recent rebound has been led by banking stocks. Miscellaneous Amendments Act number 12 of 2019 in all its fine form. This is from Wazua, making it permissible for a forceful takeover threshold, previously at 90%, now it is at 50%. The NSE 20 is down 10.81% year to date. Thank you for stopping by.